He saw the notification and didn't open it. Not because he was afraid. Because he was busy. There was dinner to think about. A message to reply. A day that had already taken enough from him. The app would still be there later. He told himself that calmly. Reasonably. The way people do when they don't want to make a big thing out of something small. It wasn't that he didn't know what was inside. He had a general sense. Enough to feel responsible. Bills had gone out. Money had come in. Nothing urgent was waiting. So he locked the phone and moved on. Later came that night. Then the next day. Then the week after that. Each time the thought appeared, I should check, it was met with a softer one. Not now. Not now became familiar. Comfortable. Almost responsible. Because nothing bad happened. Life kept moving. Meals were paid for. Small comforts still fit into the day. And that was enough to believe everything was under control. Until one ordinary evening, when the room was quiet enough for thoughts to catch up. He opened the app. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. Just, finally. He didn't panic. He didn't feel shock. What he felt was something subtler. A realization that the numbers themselves weren't the problem. It was how long he had avoided them. He didn't think of himself as careless. He thought of himself as responsible. And that belief made the pattern harder to see. He wasn't reckless with money. At least, that's what he told himself. He paid attention. He planned. He worried. Often. But somehow, money always seemed to move faster than he expected. Nothing dramatic ever happened. No sudden collapse. No single bad decision. Just small choices made daily. A coffee here. A reward there. A quiet justification whispered in moments of stress. He didn't call it spending. He called it coping. Every month, he promised himself the same thing. This time, I'll be more disciplined. This time, I'll be intentional. And every month the promise faded, not because he didn't care, but because life kept asking for comfort before it asked for discipline. What he didn't realize was this. Money was teaching him. Not his goals. Not his plans. His habits. Money doesn't respond to what you want. It responds to what you repeat. The way you spend when you're tired. The way you spend when you're stressed. The way you spend when you tell yourself you deserve it. Slowly, quietly, a pattern forms. And that pattern becomes a code. Most people think their problem with money is income. Or opportunity. Or luck. But long before money becomes a number, it becomes a behavior. One evening he sat alone, scrolling through transactions. Not judging. Not panicking. Just noticing. And for the first time, he saw it clearly. His money wasn't betraying him. It was obeying him. This audiobook is not about getting rich. It's about understanding the invisible rules that governs how money flows through your life. The habits you don't question. The emotional trades you don't notice. The comfort that quietly costs you tomorrow. Because once you understand the money code, you can change it. Chapter 1. Money is a mirror. The next morning felt normal. That was the strange part. After everything he had seen the night before, he expected something to feel different. But the morning moved the way mornings always do. He woke up. checked the time, scrolled without thinking. Coffee first. Responsibilities next. The quiet agreement to deal with bigger things later. Money didn't announce itself. It never did. It waited in the background, woven into choices that didn't feel like choices. The day after awareness. He remembered the numbers from the night before. Not sharply, not in detail, just enough to know they were still there. Nothing had changed overnight. And yet, something had shifted quietly inside him. Awareness has weight. Once you see something clearly, it doesn't disappear when you stop looking at it. It follows you into ordinary moments. At lunch, he hesitated. Not because he couldn't afford the meal. He could. But because he noticed the reason behind the choice. He wasn't hungry. He was tired. That realization stayed with him longer than the taste of the food. What money reflects. Most people think money reflects income, or opportunity, or luck. But money reflects something closer. It reflects how you respond when life presses in quietly. When you're tired. When you're stressed. When you tell yourself, just this once. Money mirrors the moments. When you stop negotiating with yourself. That's why looking at spending can feel personal. It's not about numbers. It's about behavior. And behavior always tells a story. Later that day, another small moment appeared. A notification. A sale. A familiar sense of permission. He felt it before he thought it. That subtle leaning forward inside. The justification arrived quickly. I've been good. It's not much. I'll adjust later. He paused. Not long enough to feel heroic. Just long enough to notice the pattern. This wasn't about the item. It was about relief. Money wasn't solving a problem. It was softening a feeling. Guided reflection. Seeing the mirror. Think about the last thing you spent money on that wasn't planned. Not the price. The moment. What were you feeling just before? Pressure. Fatigue. That quiet sense of being behind? Money often enters at the exact moment awareness leaves. Why this feels uncomfortable. Seeing the mirror creates tension. Because it removes excuses without offering solutions yet. You realize the pattern, but you don't know how to interrupt it. That space, between awareness and change, is where most people turn away. They look for tactics, budgets, rules, anything to avoid sitting with what the mirror is showing them. But rules applied too early feel like punishment. Before discipline, there must be honesty. The mirror doesn't judge. Money does not shame you. It doesn't accuse. It doesn't punish. It simply records. Every coffee bought out of exhaustion. Every reward purchased out of stress. Every decision is postponed until later. Over time, those records form a picture. Not of who you want to be, but of who you are when no one is watching. That's the reflection most people avoid. Take a slow breath. Nothing needs to be fixed right now. You are not behind. You are simply seeing what has always been there. The quiet realization. That evening, he noticed how often money entered his thoughts. Not as fearful, not as exciting, as background noise. A tool for smoothing edges, for keeping discomfort manageable. He realized something unsettling. Money had become a mediator between him and his emotions. And mediators, when used too often, replace direct conversation. What the mirror asks. Money doesn't ask how much do you make. It asks, how do you respond? When you're tired, when you're stressed, when you feel unseen. Those answers repeat. And repetition is how a code forms. The first step is not changing behavior. It's seeing it without turning away. Because once you recognize what money has been reflecting, you begin to notice what keeps pulling you back into the same choices. And once you see the reflection clearly, you start noticing something else. How comfort quietly replaces clarity. Chapter 2: The Comfort Trap. That night, comfort showed up quietly. Not as a temptation, not as excess, as a relief. The day had taken more than he expected. Nothing dramatic. Just the steady drain of decisions, responsibility, and being needed. By the time he got home, his body wanted ease before his mind wanted clarity. Where comfort lives. Comfort doesn't live in luxury. It lives in convenience. In the choice that asks the least of you when you have the least to give. He noticed how naturally his hand reached for his phone. Not to check numbers. Not to plan. To soften the edge of the day. Food delivered instead of prepared. Something small purchased instead of felt. A decision postponed instead of faced. None of it felt like a problem. That was the problem. The first agreement. The comfort trap doesn't start with losing control. It starts with agreement. An agreement that sounds like kindness. You've had a long day. You deserve this. You'll deal with the rest later. Money enters quietly here. Not as a transaction. As permission. And permission feels harmless when it's given to yourself. Later that week, the same moment returned. Different day. Same feeling. Same decision. He noticed how quickly his mind built a case. Not excitement. Not desire. Justification. This isn't a big deal. I'll make it up tomorrow. Everyone does this. The comfort trap doesn't rush you. It reassures you. Guided reflection, recognizing comfort. Think about the last time you spent money for relief. Not celebration. Not a necessity. Relief. What were you trying to soften? Fatigue. Pressure. That quiet voice that said, I can't deal with this right now. Comfort rarely announces itself. It blends in with self-care. Why comfort wins so often? Discipline asks for presence. Comfort offers escape. Discipline asks you to stay with discomfort. Comfort removes it immediately. And when energy is low, immediacy feels like mercy. This is why comfort wins even when intentions are strong. Not because you are weak. Because your nervous system prefers relief over resolution. Money becomes the fastest tool to deliver that relief. The cost you don't see. Comfort never sends an invoice. It charges you quietly. In postponed clarity. In delayed honesty. In habits that grow roots while you're not paying attention. He realized something unsettling. Every time he chose comfort, he was teaching money how to respond to stress. Not with restraint. Not with patience. With soothing. Take a slow breath. Notice how comfort feels like kindness. There is no shame here. Only awareness. When comfort becomes default. Over time, comfort stops feeling like a choice. It becomes automatic. The first response instead of the considered one. Money flows toward whatever you choose first. Not what you believe in. Not what you promise yourself. What you reach for when the day is heavy. That's how the trap forms. Quietly. Respectably. Without alarm. The moment of tension. One evening, he caught himself mid-decision. Not after. Not during regret. Midway. The urge was there. The justification is ready. But so was the awareness. For the first time, comfort didn't feel neutral. It felt persuasive. What comfort really wants. Comfort doesn't want to ruin you. It wants to protect you from feeling too much, too fast. But protection, when used as a strategy, becomes a limitation. The trap isn't comfortable. It's letting comfort decide before clarity arrives. You don't escape the comfort trap by eliminating comfort. You escape it by seeing when comfort is answering a question you haven't been named yet. Because once comfort becomes automatic, money follows it without question. And once you notice how comfort shows up, you start seeing the pattern beneath it. Because emotional spending is never random. Chapter 3. Emotional spending isn't random. The pattern didn't announce itself. It never does. It revealed itself. Through repetition. After that night. After noticing comfort for what it was. He started seeing something else. Timing. Spending didn't happen any time. It happened at specific moments. The same feeling, different days. Monday felt heavy. So did Thursday. Different reasons. Same weight. On Monday, it was pressure. Too many expectations. Too little space. On Thursday, it was empty. The kind that appears after you've done everything you were supposed to do and still feel unfinished. Both days ended the same way. A small purchase. A postponed look at the numbers. A quiet agreement to deal with things later. That's when it became clear. The spending wasn't random. It was timed. What triggers really are. Most people think triggers are obvious. A sale. A discount. An impulse. But real triggers are internal. They're states. Not situations. Fatigue. Pressure. Loneliness. That subtle feeling of falling behind. Without knowing what you're behind on. Money doesn't respond to logic. In these moments, it responds to emotion. The body decides first. He noticed something else. The decision happened before the thought. His body leaned forward before his mind explained why. The justification came later. It always did. It's not much. I'll adjust later. This isn't the real problem. But the body had already chosen. Money followed the body, not the plan. Think about the last 3 times. You spent money impulsively. Not what you bought. When you bought it. What time of day was it? What were you feeling? just before the urge appeared, tired, unseen, overstimulated, quietly overwhelmed. Patterns live in timing, not in tension. Why shame misses the point. When people notice emotional spending, they often respond with shame. I should know better. Why can't I control myself? But shame misunderstands the role money is playing. This isn't about failure. It's about regulation. Your nervous system is trying to return to balance as quickly as possible. Money just happens to be the most efficient tool available. The predictability of relief. Relief feels spontaneous, but it's learned. Once your system learns that spending eases discomfort, it remembers the path. Next time discomfort appears, the body doesn't ask for permission. It reaches. This is why emotional spending can feel out of character, because it doesn't belong to your values. It belongs to your conditioning. Take a slow breath in and let it go slowly. Notice how urges rise before words form. There is nothing wrong with this. It's simply information. When awareness changes timing, something subtle began to happen. He didn't stop spending immediately, but the timing changed. There was a pause. Short at first, but long enough to feel the emotion underneath. The urge still spoke, but it wasn't alone anymore. Awareness had entered the room, naming the emotion. One evening, instead of reaching for his phone, he named the feeling. I'm exhausted. The urge softened. Not gone. Just quieter. Another night, the feeling had a different name. I feel behind. Again, the urge lost some urgency. Money responds differently when emotion is acknowledged. Emotional spending as data. Every emotional purchase contains information about what you avoid, about what drains you, about where you seek safety. Once he saw spending this way, it stopped feeling like betrayal. It started feeling like feedback. Money wasn't sabotaging him. It was revealing what his nervous system needed. The shift from random to pattern. Random feels uncontrollable. Patterns feel interruptible. That distinction mattered, because what can be interrupted can be redesigned. Not through force, through awareness and timing. Your emotional spending has never been chaotic. It has been responsive. Responsive to states, not circumstances. And once you see the pattern clearly, you begin to notice something deeper. Because patterns don't change when you set better goals. They change when habits begin to speak louder. Chapter 4. Habits are louder than goals. The goal had been clear. He remembered setting it, writing it down, telling himself this time would be different. The intention felt sincere. And yet, days later, the habit spoke louder. When intentions meet reality, goals live in the future. Habits live in the moment. And the moment always wins when energy is low. He noticed this one evening, standing in the kitchen, scrolling without meaning to. The goal was still there. Quiet. But the habit was active. The habit didn't argue. It didn't debate. It acted. The illusion of motivation. Most people think they fail financially because they lack motivation. He had thought that too. But motivation was never the issue. Motivation appears when things are clear and hopeful. Habits appear when things are unclear and tiring. Money responds to habits, not motivation. That realization stayed with him longer than he expected. A familiar evening. It happened again. A long day. A quiet room. The same fork in the road. Cook or order. Save or soften. The goal whispered restraint. The habit offered relief. And relief felt louder. He didn't feel weak. He felt human. Guided reflection, hearing the habit. Think about the last goal you set for your money. Now think about the habit that showed up instead. Not because you forgot the goal, but because the habit was familiar. Habits don't interrupt politely. They take over quietly. Why habits are so powerful. Habits don't require energy. They save it. Your brain chooses habits because they reduce decision-making. And money follows the path of least resistance. Every repeated purchase is a vote. Not for what you want later, but for what you choose now. That's why goals feel sincere and still lose. The cost of ignoring habits. Ignoring habits doesn't make them disappear. It makes them invisible. He realized something unsettling. Every time he set a new goal without adjusting the habit, he reinforced the same outcome. The goal changed. The habit didn't. Money listened to the habit. Pause for a moment. Notice how habits feel neutral. They don't ask for belief. They only ask for repetition. The first shift, small but real. Something began to change. Not behavior. Not spending. Attention. He started noticing habits before they completed themselves. Not stopping them, just seeing them. And seeing changed the experience. The habit felt less automatic. Why this is uncomfortable. Awareness slows things down. Slowness reveals choice. And choice brings responsibility. That's why habits resist awareness. They prefer speed. Money, too, prefers speed. Goals reframed. He stopped asking, "Why can't I stick to my goals?" and started asking, "What habit is winning instead?" That question felt different. More honest. Less punishing. Goals show direction. Habits determine movement. And money always moves with what you repeat, not what you promise. Change doesn't begin with better goals. It begins when habits become visible. And once you see which habit keeps winning, you start wondering something else. Why more money doesn't seem to fix the pattern. Chapter 5. Why more money doesn't fix the code. For a long time, he believed the answer was simple. More money. Not excess. Not luxury. Just enough to feel ahead instead of behind. If there was more coming in, things would finally settle. That belief felt logical. It was also comforting. The promise of enough. He remembered the thought clearly. Once I earn a bit more, I'll relax. Once things improve, I'll be disciplined. Once there's room, I'll change my habits. The future always felt more capable than the present. When more arrives, just gradually, A little extra space. A little less pressure. And for a moment, it worked. Bills felt lighter. Choices felt easier. The urgency softened. He told himself, "See, this is what I needed." The quiet return of the pattern. But then something familiar happened. Comfort expanded. Not irresponsibly. Not recklessly. Naturally. The same habits adjusted upward. Slightly better versions. Slightly more expensive comforts. The spending didn't change direction. It changed the scale. The illusion of relief. More money did bring relief. Just not transformation. Relief feels like progress. But relief only removes pressure. It doesn't rewrite patterns. Money flowed the same way. Toward comfort. Toward ease. Toward postponement. The code stayed intact. Guided reflection, the more test. Think about a time when you had more money than before. What changed? Not immediately, but over time. Did your habits disappear, or did they upgrade? More money reveals habits. It doesn't replace them. Why the code survives growth. Money doesn't ask how much you have. It asks how you respond. When pressure appears. When freedom appears. Both moments teach money what to do next. If comfort was the response before, comfort becomes the response after. The habit survives success. The subtle disappointment. This realization landed quietly. Not as angry. Not as a regret. As a disappointment. He had expected growth to fix something internal. Instead, it had only exposed it. More money hadn't betrayed him. It had trusted him to stay the same. Pause here. This is not discouraging. It is clarifying. Nothing is broken. The code is simply intact. The dangerous hope. The most dangerous belief is not lacking. It's the belief that the future will fix what the present avoids. He saw it clearly now. Waiting for more money was another version of later. Different packaging. Same delay. Why this isn't about guilt. This isn't a failure of character. It's a misunderstanding of leverage. Money is a magnifier. It amplifies what already exists. Discipline grows with money. So does avoidance. Awareness grows. So does comfort-seeking. Money follows the dominant habit. The first real shift in thinking. He stopped asking, "How do I make more?" and started asking, "What does my money already obey?" That question felt heavier, but also more honest. Because it didn't point forward. It pointed inward. What actually changes the code? The code doesn't change when income changes. It changes when response changes. When tiredness no longer decides. When stress is felt instead of softened. When later is replaced with now. Not perfectly. Not consistently. But consciously. More money can ease pressure. But it cannot teach restraint. It cannot create clarity. It cannot rewrite a code you keep repeating. Only awareness does that. Only interruption does that. And once he understood that money wasn't the solution, he started looking deeper. At the identity behind every purchase. Chapter 6. The identity behind every purchase. At first, he thought money followed need. Then he realized it followed a habit. Now, something deeper was becoming impossible to ignore. Money wasn't just responding to what he did. It was responding to who he believed he was. The question beneath the purchase. The purchase itself was rarely the point. A meal. A subscription. Something small, meant to make life easier. But beneath each decision, a quieter question lived. What kind of person am I right now? He had never asked it directly. But money had been answering it for him. A familiar scene, seen differently. One evening, standing in line, he noticed the moment clearly. Not the price. Not the options. The feeling. The subtle desire to confirm something about himself. I'm someone who can afford this. I'm someone who doesn't struggle. I'm someone who deserves ease. The purchase felt like proof. Identity is quiet. Identity doesn't announce itself. It whispers. It shows up in moments when no one is watching. Money becomes a language here. A way to say who you are, or who you're trying to be. He realized something unsettling. Many of his purchases weren't solving problems. They were maintaining an image. Guided reflection. Who is buying? Think about the last thing you bought that wasn't necessary. Ask yourself gently, who was I being in that moment? Not who you wanted to be later. Who you were right then. Responsible? Tired? Trying to feel capable? Money listens carefully to identity. The roles we protect. He began to notice the roles he defended. The capable one. The stable one. The one who doesn't struggle. Money helped him protect those roles. Even when protecting them cost him clarity. He saw how often spending said, "I've got this," even when something felt shaky inside. Why identity is harder than habit. Habits are mechanical. Identity is emotional. Changing a habit feels like effort. Challenging identity feels like a risk. Because identity answers questions we don't say out loud. Am I safe? Am I enough? Am I falling behind? Money often steps in to answer those questions quickly. The subtle fear beneath spending. Underneath many purchases, he noticed a fear. Not fear of poverty. Fear of being exposed. Exposed as someone who didn't have it figured out. Money became armor. Not heavy. Just enough to feel protected. Stillness segment. Pause here. There is no accusation in this realization. Only understanding. You are not your purchases. But your purchases reveal where you seek safety. When identity goes unquestioned, an unexamined identity becomes expensive. Because money will keep funding it. He saw how consistency wasn't loyalty to values. It was loyalty to self-image. And self-image, when fragile, demands constant reinforcement. The first crack in the armor. One night, he didn't buy the thing. Not because he was disciplined. Because he noticed the identity asking to be protected. The discomfort lingered. But something else appeared. Honesty. He didn't collapse. He didn't disappear. The identity survived without the purchase. What money is really funding? Money funds what you keep proving. If you keep proving you are tired, money funds relief. If you keep proving you are capable, money funds appearance. If you keep proving you are intentional, money funds alignment. Money doesn't decide identity. It reinforces it. Every purchase is a quiet statement. Not about price. About self. And the moment you ask, who am I trying to be right now? Money stops feeling mysterious. It starts feeling honest. And once identity enters the picture, every purchase becomes a choice between two forces: discipline or emotional relief. Chapter 7. Discipline versus emotional relief. The tension didn't feel dramatic. It felt familiar. That was what made it dangerous. Because when two forces compete quietly, the stronger one wins before you realize a choice was made. The moment returns. It showed up again. A long day. A quiet room. The same pause before a decision. Discipline stood patiently. Silent. Emotional relief spoke first. You've done enough today. You can deal with this tomorrow. Just make it easier right now. Relief didn't argue. It understood him. Why relief feels kinder than discipline. Discipline asks for presence. Relief offers distance. Discipline says, stay with this feeling. Relief says, you don't have to feel this. And when emotions are loud, distance feels like safety. Money becomes the fastest bridge to that safety. A subtle realization. He noticed something important. Discipline never rushed him. It waited. Relief demanded immediacy. Now. Before it gets uncomfortable. That urgency was familiar. It was the same urgency that had shaped his habits for years. Guided reflection, the inner argument. Think about the last time you chose relief over discipline. Not as judgment. As an observation. What did relief promise you at that moment? Comfort? Escape? Silence? What did discipline ask instead? To wait? To feel? To stay present? Discipline is misunderstood. Most people think discipline is about control. It isn't. Discipline is about tolerance. Tolerance for discomfort. For uncertainty. For unfinished feelings. Relief removes discomfort. Discipline expands your capacity to sit with it. Money flows differently depending on which one you practice. The cost of always choosing relief. Relief is not wrong. It's human. But when relief becomes automatic, it trains avoidance. And avoidance has a cost that doesn't show up immediately. It delays growth. It weakens trust in yourself. It teaches money to soothe instead of support. A small, difficult choice. One evening, the moment stretched longer than usual. The urge was there. The justification is ready. But something held him in place. Not willpower. Awareness. He didn't buy it. He didn't feel victorious. He felt exposed. What discipline actually feels like. Discipline didn't feel strong. It felt uncomfortable, restless, unsettled, but also clean. There was no distraction, no numbing, just the feeling and the choice to stay. Take a slow breath. Notice how relief tightens. Notice how discipline opens. One contract time. The other expands it. The power shift. Something subtle changed that night. Not his behavior forever. Not his habits completely. His confidence. He realized discipline was not punishment. It was self-respect expressed in real time. Money responded differently when discipline entered the room. Not dramatically. Quietly. Relief isn't the enemy. Relief doesn't disappear. It learns its place. When discipline leads, relief becomes intentional. Chosen. Not automatic. Money flows differently when relief is a choice, not a reflex. Every purchase is a conversation between two forces. One asks for comfort now. The other asks for strength later. Neither is evil. But only one builds trust with your future self. And money listens carefully to which voice you answer. Chapter 8. Learning to pause before you pay. It felt awkward. Like standing in a doorway, unsure whether to step forward or turn back. After discipline stayed long enough to be felt, something new appeared. Space. Not freedom. Not control. Space. The space between urge and action. He noticed it the next time the urge arrived. Same trigger. Same internal pull. But now, there was a gap. Small. Uncomfortable. But real. The urge spoke. But it didn't command. It waited. Why the pause feels strange. Most people live without pauses. Reaction follows feeling without interruption. The pause feels strange because it removes momentum. Momentum is comforting. It carries you forward without asking questions. The pause asks one. What am I responding to right now? A small scene, seen clearly. He stood in front of the screen. The option was there. Familiar. By now. His thumb hovered. This time, he didn't rush to explain. He didn't justify. He didn't argue. He paused. Guided reflection, feeling the pause. Think about the last moment you felt the urge to spend. Now imagine inserting 3 seconds before acting. Not to decide. Not to judge. Just to feel. What shows up in that space? What the pause reveals. The pause doesn't remove the urge. It reveals it. In the pause, he noticed the emotion more clearly. Not as a story. As a sensation. Tightness. Restlessness. That subtle pull toward relief. The urge lost some authority when it was felt fully. Why pausing changes money. Money moves fastest when awareness is absent. The pause brings awareness back into the transaction. It doesn't say no. It says wait. And waiting changes everything. Because waiting allows choice to re-enter the room. The first conscious delay. He didn't stop spending altogether. But he delayed. 10 minutes. Sometimes an hour. Sometimes until morning. Not as a rule. As an experiment. And something unexpected happened. Many urges didn't survive the delay. Pause here. Notice how urges feel urgent in motion and weaker in stillness. Nothing is required of you. Just awareness. When the pause becomes a skill. The pause grew stronger with repetition. Not longer. Clearer. He began to recognize the early signals. The slight restlessness. The mental leaning forward. Catching the urge before it became a decision. Money slowed down. Not dramatically, but noticeably. The emotional cost of pausing. Pausing isn't free. It costs comfort. It asks you to sit with what the purchase was meant to avoid. Fatigue. Loneliness. The sense of being behind. But something else appeared in that discomfort. Clarity. The new relationship with money. Money began to feel different. Less reactive. More deliberate. Not because he controlled it, but because he slowed it. Slowness revealed intention. And intention changed direction. When pausing doesn't mean saying no, sometimes, after the pause, he still chose to spend. But the feeling was different. No urgency. No justification. Just a choice. Money felt clean again. Because it wasn't escaping anything. The pause is not about denial. It's about presence. It returns choice to moments that used to feel automatic. And when you learn to pause before you pay, money stops reacting and starts responding. And once the pause becomes familiar, you begin to realize something else. The code doesn't change all at once. It rewrites itself slowly. Chapter 9. Rewriting the code slowly. Change didn't arrive in a moment. There was no clear line between before and after. No dramatic day when everything suddenly worked. Instead, change arrived the way habits always do, quietly, through repetition. That realization unsettled him at first. Because part of him still wanted a breakthrough. Something decisive. Something clean. But money had never worked that way. And neither had he. The discomfort of going slow. The pause was working. Not perfectly, but consistently enough to be noticed. Money wasn't leaking the way it used to. But neither was it suddenly accumulating. That middle space felt strange. Unfamiliar. Because it offered neither relief nor reward. Just restraint. And restraint has no applause. The old expectation. Part of him kept waiting for proof that this was worth it. A visible result. A noticeable shift. A moment where the numbers reflected his effort clearly. But the numbers changed slowly. Too slowly to satisfy impatience. Too quietly to impress. This was the part no one talks about it. The stage where discipline doesn't feel rewarding yet, but relief is no longer available. The temptation to quit quietly. He noticed a new temptation. Not to spend impulsively, but to loosen standards just a little. Not to abandon the pause, but to shorten it. To say, "I've been good enough." This temptation was subtle. It sounded reasonable. That's what made it dangerous. Because it wasn't urging him to break the code, only to stop rewriting it. Guided reflection. The slow phase. If you've ever tried to change something deeply ingrained, you know this phase. Where effort continues but excitement fades. Where discipline becomes routine and results lag behind. This is not failure. This is integration. The real work of rewriting. Rewriting the code was not about eliminating spending. It was about changing what spending responded to. Before, money moved at the first sign of discomfort. Now, discomfort was allowed to exist longer. That alone changed everything. Because habits don't need to be destroyed. They need to be displaced. A longer look at one ordinary week. 1 week passed without anything remarkable happening. No splurges. No strict deprivation. Just ordinary decisions, made with slightly more awareness. He cooked more often. Not because it was virtuous, but because he noticed how often he used food to escape tiredness. He still spent, but later than before. And sometimes, not at all. The identity shift, quiet but real. Something inside him began to change. Not his personality. His trust in himself. He noticed he could feel discomfort without immediately fixing it. That mattered more than any number. Because for the first time, money was no longer managing his emotions. He was. Why this phase is so often abandoned. Most people quit here. Not loudly. Quietly. They tell themselves they'll return to it later. When life is calmer. When there's more money. When motivation comes back. But this phase is where the code actually changes. Not when it's exciting. When it's ordinary. Take a breath here. Notice if part of you is waiting for a result before committing fully. That waiting is the old code speaking. The new code doesn't rush proof. When money starts behaving differently, over time, something subtle happened. Money began to feel predictable. Not because life was controlled, but because reactions were. Expenses no longer surprised him. Because they weren't impulsive. They were anticipated. And anticipation created calm. The myth of the big moment. There was no single day when he felt finished. No moment where he declared victory. Just a growing sense that money no longer felt chaotic. That was enough. Not perfection, direction. Rewriting the money code does not happen through intensity. It happens through consistency. Through small pauses. Repeated awareness. And the courage to stay with discomfort long enough for it to pass. Slow change is real change. Because it lasts. And when the code begins to stabilize, a different relationship forms. Money stops feeling unpredictable. It starts feeling trusting. Chapter 10. When money starts trusting you. Trust doesn't arrive loudly. It doesn't announce itself. It forms the way habits do, through repetition, through follow-through, through the quiet consistency of showing up the same way even when no one is watching. He didn't wake up one morning feeling different about money. What changed was subtler than that. Money stopped feeling unpredictable. Not because life became smooth, it didn't, but because his responses became familiar. And familiarity is the beginning of trust. The end of financial whiplash. For a long time, money had felt like something that happened to him. Unexpected expenses. Sudden shortages. That recurring sense of being slightly off balance. Even when he tried to be careful, there was always a surprise waiting. But now, the surprises softened. Not eliminated, just reduced. Because money began moving in ways he could anticipate. Patterns, once chaotic, became legible. And legibility creates calm. Trust is built on predictability. Money doesn't trust plans. It trusts patterns. It doesn't respond to promises. It responds to follow-through. For the first time, his follow-through wasn't powered by motivation. It was powered by rhythm. Pause. Awareness. Choice. over and over again. Money learned this rhythm. And when money learns a rhythm, it begins to cooperate. A week without tension. 1 week passed without that familiar knot in his chest. Not because nothing was due, but because nothing felt hidden. He knew where his money was going. Not in detail, but in direction. And direction mattered more than precision. There is a unique peace that comes from knowing you won't surprise yourself later. That peace is what trust feels like. Guided reflection, predictability. Think about your relationship with money right now. Not how much you have. How predictable it feels. Do you trust yourself to respond the same way when pressure appears? Or does each month feel like a negotiation with a different version of you? Trust begins when those versions start agreeing. When money stops needing supervision. He realized something quietly profound. He was checking his money less often. Not because he was avoiding it, but because he wasn't anxious about it. This was new. Before, checking had been compulsive. A way to soothe uncertainty. Now, checking felt informational. Neutral. Money didn't need constant supervision because it wasn't being asked to manage his emotions anymore. Trust is a two-way relationship. Money trusting you doesn't mean abundance appears overnight. It means stability becomes possible. And stability is fertile ground. When money trusts you, it stops bracing for impact. It stops assuming it will be used to soften discomfort. Instead, it begins to hold position. And holding position is how resources accumulate. The quiet confidence. There was a new confidence in him. Not pride. Not excitement. Confidence built from evidence. Evidence that he could pause. That he could wait. That he could choose. This confidence didn't push him to take risks. It made him patient. Patience is what money respects most. Pause here. Notice the difference between control and trust. Control is tense. Trust is calm. One exhausts you. The other conserves energy. Money moves better in calm systems. When choices stop feeling heavy, decisions became lighter. Not because they were easier, but because they weren't emotional. He didn't argue with himself as much. The internal debate shortened. Because the answer was often already clear. This clarity didn't come from discipline alone. It came from trust, earned slowly. The new role of money. Money's role shifted. It was no longer a buffer between him and discomfort. It became a tool for direction. Planning felt realistic now. Not hopeful. Not defensive. Realistic. Because plans were being built on behavior that actually existed. Trust doesn't mean perfection. There were still moments of relief. Still occasional indulgences. But they no longer unraveled everything. Because they weren't reflexive. They were contained. Trust doesn't require purity. It requires consistency. And consistency was finally present. When money starts trusting you, life feels quieter. Not because problems disappear, but because your response becomes reliable. Money stops reacting to your moods. It starts aligning with your direction. And alignment is what creates momentum that doesn't burn you out. And once trust replaces tension, you begin to notice something deeper. A sense of safety that doesn't depend on spending. Chapter 11. Building Safety Without Spending. For most of his life, safety had been something external. Not a concept. Not a philosophy. A feeling. And whenever that feeling wavered, money stepped in to restore it. Not consciously. Not deliberately. Just reliably. Safety came in familiar forms. A full cart. A paid bill. A purchase that said, "You're okay for now." He had never questioned that equation. Money equaled safety. The invisible contract. Looking back, he realized he had made an unspoken agreement. Whenever discomfort appeared, money would soften it. Whenever uncertainty surfaced, money would reassure him. And in exchange, he would keep earning, keep spending, keep the system moving. It wasn't greed. It was fear of instability. Fear of being caught unprepared. Fear of sitting too long with the feeling that something might go wrong. Money became a shield. Thin. Flexible. But always nearby. When spending becomes a signal, he began noticing how often spending followed uncertainty. Not big uncertainty, small, everyday moments. A conversation that didn't go well. A plan that felt shaky. A quiet evening where thoughts grew louder than usual. Spending stepped in like a familiar voice saying, "Don't worry. I've got this." And for years, that voice had been convincing. Guided reflection. What feels like safety? Pause here for a moment. Think about what makes you feel safe when life feels uncertain. Not what you tell yourself should feel safe, what actually does. Is it control? Preparedness? Distraction? Or spending? There is no judgment in this. Only clarity. The first time he didn't buy safety. One evening, after a long and draining day, the familiar unease appeared. The kind that used to send him straight toward relief. The urge was immediate. Not to buy something specific, just to restore balance. But something stopped him. Not discipline. Not fear. Curiosity. What would happen if he didn't buy safety this time? Sitting with the absence. The feeling didn't disappear. That surprised him. Spending had always promised resolution. But without it, the discomfort remained unresolved. Unsoftened. His body reacted first. Restlessness. A subtle tightness in his chest. The urge returned, stronger now, as if insisting. This is what money is for. The moment safety shifts. He stayed. Not heroically. Not calmly. Just long enough for something unexpected to happen. The feeling softened on its own. Not completely. Not magically. But enough to notice. The discomfort had a curve. It rose, peaked, and began to fall. Without money intervening. What safety really is. That moment changed something fundamental. Because it revealed a truth he had never tested before. Safety is not something you buy. It's something you build by surviving discomfort without escaping it. Money had been a shortcut. A fast, efficient one. But shortcuts don't teach resilience. They postpone it. The new definition of safety. Safety began to take a new shape. Not as certainty, but as capacity. The capacity to sit with unfinished feelings. The capacity to wait without panic. The capacity to trust that discomfort is not danger. This kind of safety didn't depend on account balances. It depended on presence. Take a slow breath. Notice how your body responds to uncertainty. Notice how quickly it looks for something external to hold on to. Now notice this. You are still here. When money stops being a crutch. Over time, something subtle but powerful happened. Money stopped being the first response. It didn't disappear. It just moved back in line. Emotion first. Awareness second. Choice third. Money followed last. And that order changed everything. Why this is the hardest shift. Building safety without spending is uncomfortable at first. Because it removes your fastest coping mechanism. It asks you to trust something internal before reaching for something external. That's why many people never make this shift. Not because they can't, but because they never pause long enough to find out they can. True financial safety doesn't come from having more. It comes from needing less to feel okay. When you no longer require spending to regulate your emotions, money becomes what it was meant to be. A tool, not a shield. And once safety is no longer purchased, a different kind of power emerges. The calm power of consistency. Chapter 12. The calm power of consistency. Consistency didn't feel impressive. That was the first thing he noticed. There was no rush, no surge of motivation, no sense of breakthrough. Just repetition. The same kinds of decisions, made the same kinds of ways, over and over again. And for someone who had spent years reacting emotionally to money, this calm felt unfamiliar. When progress stops announcing itself. At first, he kept looking for signs. A moment where he'd feel proud. A number that would confirm this was working. But the days passed quietly. Money came in. Bills went out. Choices were made without debate. Nothing collapsed. Nothing spiked. And slowly, he realized something important. This was the sound of stability. Consistency is invisible at first. Consistency doesn't feel powerful because it doesn't demand attention. It doesn't rush you. It doesn't excite you. It simply continues. And in a world trained to notice extremes, continuation feels insignificant. But money responds deeply to what repeats. Not what inspires. Not what motivates. What repeats. Guided reflection, boredom as a signal. Pause for a moment. Think about the last time you stuck with something long enough that it stopped feeling exciting. Did you interpret that boredom as a sign to quit? Or as a sign that something was finally stabilizing? Consistency often disguises itself as boredom. The end of financial drama. One of the most noticeable changes was emotional. Money stopped creating stories in his head. There was no spiral. No self-blame. No internal negotiation. Decisions felt quiet. And quiet decisions rarely feel dramatic enough to celebrate. But the drama was expensive. Calm was efficient. Why consistency builds power. Power doesn't come from intensity. It comes from reliability. Reliability builds trust. Trust builds momentum. And momentum, once steady, requires less effort to maintain. Money began to move without emotional friction. Not because there were no feelings, but because feelings were no longer steering. The subtle compound effect. Weeks passed. Then months. Not with visible leaps, but with small accumulations. Less regret. More clarity. Fewer impulsive repairs. More intentional direction. The compound effect was not just financial. It was psychological. He trusted himself more. And self-trust is the most underrated asset. Take a slow breath here. Notice how calm feels different from excitement. Calm doesn't pull attention. It holds it. This is the state where consistency thrives. Consistency removes decision fatigue. Another change appeared quietly. Decision fatigue began to fade. He wasn't constantly renegotiating his values. The pause had become automatic. The questions were familiar. Is this necessary? Is this emotional? Can this wait? When questions repeat, answers stabilize. And stabilized answers create freedom. Why people undervalue this phase? Most people leave here. Not because it's hard, but because it's quiet. There's no story to tell. No dramatic before and after. Just steadiness. But steadiness is where real wealth is built. Not just financial wealth, emotional wealth. Consistency as identity. Something shifted internally. Consistency stopped being an effort. It became my identity. I am someone who pauses. I am someone who chooses deliberately. When behavior becomes identity, it no longer requires motivation. Money responds best to identities that don't fluctuate. Consistency is quiet. It doesn't impress. It doesn't rush. But it builds something that intensity never can. Stability. Trust. Momentum that doesn't exhaust you. And when consistency becomes natural, money follows calmly. And once consistency becomes who you are, your definition of wealth begins to change. Wealth becomes a byproduct, not a chase. Chapter 13. Wealth as a byproduct, not a chase. For a long time, wealth had felt like something ahead of him. Always slightly out of reach. Not because he wasn't working hard, but because the finish line kept moving. There was always another level, another number, another version of enough. And chasing it had shaped more of his decisions than he realized. The quiet exhaustion of chasing. Chasing wealth didn't feel aggressive. It felt responsible. Earn more. Save more. Do better. Those ideas sounded mature. But beneath them was a constant tension, the feeling that what he had was never quite sufficient. That tension showed up everywhere. In how quickly he compared himself. In how often he felt behind. In the pressure to make money prove something about him. Wealth, when chased, becomes a measurement of worth. And worth is a heavy thing to carry on your back. When the chase quieted, something changed as consistency settled in. The urgency faded. Not ambition, urgency. He still wanted progress. I still cared about direction. But the feeling of being hunted by the future was gone. Money no longer felt like a race he was losing. It felt like a system he was learning to cooperate. Guided reflection, the feeling of enough. Pause here for a moment. Think about the last time you felt pressure to earn more. Was it about survival or about comparison? Was it about needs or about proving something? Wealth feels different depending on the question it's answering. Wealth without tension. He noticed something unexpected. As the chase slowed, his decisions improved. Not because he was stricter, but because he was clearer. He didn't need every opportunity. He didn't panic at every expense. Money stopped feeling like a scarce resource that might disappear if he didn't grab fast enough. Scarcity had lived in his mindset, not his balance. Why chasing breaks the code. When wealth is chased, decisions become distorted. Short-term wins start to feel more important than long-term stability. Impulse hides inside ambition. Risk disguises itself as confidence. And money, once again, is asked to regulate emotion, this time the emotion of fear that you're not doing enough. The code can't stabilize under pressure. It stabilizes under clarity. Wealth as a consequence. The idea landed slowly. Wealth was not a target. It was a consequence. A consequence of decisions made without panic. Of habits that didn't change with mood. Of a relationship with money that wasn't asking it to prove identity or soothe insecurity. When those conditions were present, wealth didn't need to be chased. It accumulated naturally. Take a slow breath here. Notice the difference between wanting more and fearing not having enough. One expands you. The other tightens you. Wealth grows best in expanded systems. Redefining what wealth means. Wealth stopped being a single number. It became layered. Predictability. Choice. Time without anxiety. The ability to say no without fear. The ability to wait without stress. Those things were invisible, but powerful. And money supported them instead of undermining them. The absence of hurry. He noticed how rarely he felt rushed now. Rushed decisions had been expensive. Calm decisions were efficient. Without hurry, he could evaluate. Without panic, he could plan realistically. Wealth grows best when urgency is removed. Why this phase feels unspectacular. There was nothing flashy about this version of wealth. No dramatic lifestyle change. No sudden elevation. Just steadiness. But steadiness is what most people are actually chasing, even when they don't realize it. They call it success. They call it freedom. But what they want is relief from instability. Wealth does not arrive when you chase it hard enough. It arrives when you stop asking money to solve emotional problems. When habits stabilize, when identity settles, when consistency becomes normal. Wealth shows up quietly. As a byproduct. Not a pursuit. And once wealth is no longer the focus, attention returns to something deeper. Living below the noise. Chapter 14. Living below the noise. The noise had never announced itself. It didn't arrive suddenly. And it didn't leave dramatically. It had always been there. In the background. Humming beneath decisions. Shaping urgency. Pushing reactions. For years. He thought noise was external. The world. The economy. Other people's lives. Other people's progress. But as things slowed, as money stopped demanding attention, he began to realize something unsettling. Most of the noise had been internal. The sound of constant comparison. Comparison had once felt harmless. Just information. Just awareness. But the comparison is loud. It fills quiet moments with imagined timelines and borrowed standards. He noticed how often money decisions used to carry other people's voices. They're ahead. You should be further. You're late. Those voices created urgency. Urgency created a reaction. And the reaction had been expensive. Guided reflection, where the noise comes from. Pause here. Think about the last time you felt pressure around money. Was the pressure coming from a real need, or from comparison, from necessity, or from expectation? Noise often disguises itself as motivation. The quiet that follows stability. As the noise faded, a different quality entered his life. Space. Not emptiness. Space. Space to think, without rushing to decide. Space to feel, without needing to fix it. Space to plan, without panic. This was unfamiliar. For a long time, urgency had been mistaken for progress. But urgency had only kept him reacting. Money without the commentary. Money began to exist without commentary. No constant internal narration. No mental scoreboard, tracking wins and losses. Just information. Numbers. Direction. This neutrality felt strange at first. Emotion had always been part of the process. Now emotion stepped back. Not suppressed. Just no longer in charge. Take a slow breath here. Notice how quiet feels when nothing is demanding a reaction. Quiet is not empty. It's stable. This is what living below the noise feels like. The difference between silence and stillness. Silence can feel uncomfortable. It exposes thoughts. You've been avoiding it. Stillness feels different. Stillness doesn't demand answers. It allows them to arrive when they're ready. Living below the noise didn't mean disengaging from life. It meant responding instead of reacting. When life stops feeling like a race. Without noise, time felt different. Days felt fuller, even though nothing new had been added. Moments weren't rushed past, on the way to the next thing. Money decisions, once heavy with implication, became light, because they were no longer loaded with meaning about identity, worth, or arrival. Why most people never reach this layer? Most people stay in noise, not because they choose it, but because they never slow down enough to hear anything else. Noise rewards speed. Stillness requires patience. Noise celebrates urgency. Stillness values alignment. Money behaves very differently in each environment. Living below the noise isn't passive. This wasn't withdrawal. It wasn't avoidance. He still worked, still planned, still cared deeply about direction. But decisions now came from clarity, not pressure. And clarity is a quieter force, but far more powerful. The new baseline. Living below the noise became the new baseline. Not something he had to maintain consciously. Just the environment. His habits now supported. Money didn't demand attention. It cooperated. And cooperation felt like freedom. When you live below the noise, money stops shouting. It stops rushing you. It becomes quiet enough to be useful. And in that quiet, you realize something important. Peace was never on the other side of more. It was beneath the noise all along. And once the noise fades completely, only one thing remains: the code you leave behind. Chapter 15. The Code You Leave Behind. He used to think the money code was something private, a personal system, something that affected only his bank account, his stress levels, his future. But standing where he was now, with the noise gone and the urgency quiet, he saw the truth more clearly. The code was never just about money. It was about what he taught life to expect from him. What remains when urgency leaves? Without urgency, a strange stillness settled in. Not emptiness. Not boredom. Presence. For the first time in a long while, his decisions weren't chasing anything. They weren't trying to prove their worth. They weren't trying to erase discomfort. They were simply aligned with who he had become. That alignment changed everything. The invisible influence of behavior. He realized something quietly profound. Money had been watching him longer than he had been watching it. Every pause. Every moment of restraint. Every time he chose presence over escape. Those moments had accumulated. Not into perfection, but into trust. And trust had changed how resources moved through his life. What are you teaching? Pause here. Think about the patterns you repeat when no one is watching. The small choices. The emotional reactions. The habits you excuse because they feel minor. Those are not small. They are instructions. Life listens carefully to repetition. The code extends beyond money. The change didn't stop with finances. It spread into how he handled pressure, into how he delayed gratification, into how he trusted himself to sit with uncertainty. Money had been the training ground, but the discipline applied everywhere. The pause he learned before spending showed up before speaking. The awareness he practiced around habits appeared in relationships. The calm he built with consistency changed how he moved through life. The legacy of a quiet system. Legacy isn't always visible. Sometimes it doesn't look like wealth or titles or recognition. Sometimes legacy looks like stability. Like not passing anxiety forward. Like being someone who doesn't panic under pressure. Like teaching without words that restraint is strength. The code he was leaving behind wasn't loud, but it was solid. Take a breath here. Notice how different this feels from the beginning. Not more exciting. More grounded. This is the feeling of completion without collapse. What he no longer needed. He no longer needed money to soothe him. He no longer needed spending to feel capable. He no longer needed urgency to feel alive. Those needs had been replaced with something quieter, self-trust. And self-trust changed the future automatically. Because futures are built by people who trust themselves to choose well when it matters. The final understanding. The money code was never broken. It was always working. Responding faithfully to habits, to identity, to emotional patterns. When those changed, the code followed. Not instantly, but permanently. This was the real power. Not control, alignment. what the listener takes forward. If there is one thing to carry forward from this journey, it is this: money is not shaped by desire. It is shaped by repetition. By what you do when you are tired. By how you respond when you are stressed. By whether you pause or escape. Every day, you are writing the code. And every day, money is learning you. The ending that isn't an ending. This isn't the end of the work. It's the end of confusion. The end of reacting blindly. The end of believing that more will fix what awareness can heal. From here, the path is quieter. But it is steadier. And steadiness is what carries you forward when motivation fades. The code you leave behind. The money code you leave behind is not what you earn. It is how you respond. It is the habits you normalize. The pauses you protect. The calm you choose when no one is watching. Because long after numbers change, and circumstances shift, and seasons pass, your code remains. And it teaches everything that comes next how to treat you. For those still learning the code, if you're listening to this, and part of you feels seen, that's not an accident. This wasn't written for people who have everything figured out. It was written for people who are still paying attention, still noticing their habits, still questioning their reactions, still trying to understand why money seems to move the way it does through their lives. If you're still learning the code, you're not behind. You're early. Because most people never stop long enough to notice the patterns that quietly controls them. They keep reacting. They keep blaming circumstances. They keep waiting for more money to do the work awareness was meant to do. But you paused. You listened. And that alone changes the direction of things. Money will keep watching you, not judging, learning. Learning how you respond when you're tired. Learning what you do when you're stressed. Learning whether you escape discomfort or sit with it long enough to choose deliberately. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be strict. You just have to be honest, often enough, for a new pattern to form. That's how codes change. Not through force. Through repetition. Some days, you'll still choose comfort. And that's okay. What matters is that comfort no longer decides for you, without being noticed. Some days, you'll pause and choose differently. Those days matter more than they look like they do. Because money doesn't change in response to motivation. It changes in response to behavior. That repeats. If there's one thing to remember, let it be this. You are always teaching money how to treat you. Through what you tolerate. Through what you delay. Through what you face. Instead of soften. And the moment you become aware of that, the code is no longer running you. You're rewriting it. Quietly. Patiently. One decision at a time. If this audiobook helped you slow down, even slightly, then it's already done its work. Stay aware. Stay honest. Stay consistent. The rest will follow.